Hey there, I'm Jim Rohn. And if you've ever loved someone who constantly kept you at arm's length, someone who pulled away when things got close, gave you mixed signals, or made you feel like your emotional needs were somehow too much, then you already know the pain of being in a relationship with a dismissive avoidant. At first, it probably felt magical. They were charming, independent, maybe even affectionate in subtle ways. But slowly, something shifted. You found yourself walking on eggshells. You started holding back what you really felt. You wondered if you were too needy, too sensitive, or just not enough. You chased moments of closeness only to be met with silenced detachment or cold logic when it really mattered. Sound familiar? Today, I'm going to walk you through 5 brutally honest realizations that often come after loving a dismissive avoidant. Things I wish someone had told me sooner. These aren't just insights, they're lifelines. Because what you went through wasn't just a rough patch. It was emotional disconnection disguised as love. And the longer you stay in that dynamic, the more you lose touch with your own self-worth. We're going to talk about why love alone isn't enough, why your needs were never too much, and how to finally let go of the idea that if you just did one more thing right, they'd stay. This video is about taking your power back, not through blame, but through clarity. If you're ready to stop second-guessing yourself and start healing, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell, because I release new content every week to help you navigate relationships with emotional clarity, strength, and self-respect. Let's get into it. This is a conversation that could change everything. Loving someone with a dismissive avoidant attachment style can be one of the most emotionally confusing experiences you'll ever go through. It often starts off with promise. In the beginning, they might be charming, steady, even attentive in their own quiet way. They don't overwhelm you with emotion, but there's something intriguing about their independence and control. It can feel safe at first, like they won't flood you with drama or unpredictability. But slowly, that emotional distance starts to reveal itself. Moments that should bring you closer vulnerability, hard conversations, deeper emotional connection are met with avoidance deflection, or worse, complete silence. And that's where the pain starts to set in, because you're not just confused, you're working overtime to close the gap. You try harder to connect. You show up more. You lower your expectations, rationalize their withdrawal, or convince yourself that if you just love them the right way, they'll open up. You might even start to walk on eggshells carefully, editing your emotions, being easier, less needy, more patient, thinking that your adaptability will finally make them feel safe enough to stay. But here's the heartbreaking truth. No amount of shrinking yourself will ever make someone ready for intimacy if they are emotionally closed off. And the worst part, you begin to internalize their behavior as a reflection of you. When they go cold or distant, you assume it's because you messed up. When they shut down, you believe it's because you were too much. That emotional inconsistency trains you to see yourself as the problem even when your needs are completely valid. Over time, you stop expressing those needs. You silence your feelings. You begin to accept emotional crumbs and call it love. I've worked with so many people who've been stuck in this loop, and it's not because they're weak or naive, it's because they're deeply loyal. They see the potential. They remember the good moments. They're willing to put in the emotional work, and that's admirable. But here's what you need to know. Connection doesn't happen when only one person is willing to engage emotionally. You cannot build intimacy by constantly reaching across the divide while the other person continues to retreat. So if you found yourself loving someone who can't or won't meet you emotionally, you're not crazy for wanting closeness. And you're not broken because they couldn't give it. You were just trying to love someone who learned to survive by avoiding the very thing you were offering. In the next section, we'll talk about one of the first hard realizations you come to after being in this kind of relationship and how understanding it can begin to set you free. Stick around. You're not alone in this. To really understand the dynamic of loving a dismissive avoidant, you have to look beneath the surface of their behavior. Avoidant partners usually aren't cold-hearted people. In fact, many of them have big hearts, but those hearts have been heavily guarded. And there's a reason for that. Most avoidants didn't grow up in environments where emotions were welcomed, validated, or responded to with care. Instead, they learned early on that showing emotion, especially need, sadness, or vulnerability, was either ignored, criticized, or punished. So what did they do? They adapted. They shut those emotions down, buried them deep, and developed a fierce sense of self-reliance. Not because they didn't want connection, but because connection never felt emotionally safe. Fast forward to adulthood, and that early wiring still runs the show. When things start to get close in a romantic relationship, when someone wants more vulnerability, emotional consistency, or real intimacy, it activates a kind of internal alarm for the avoidant partner. Their nervous system says, this is dangerous. It's not a conscious choice to withdraw. It's a protective reflex. It's how they learned to survive. So they create space. They go silent. They push you away, not to hurt you, but to protect themselves from the overwhelming feeling that they're about to be swallowed up or exposed. Now here's where it gets hard for you, the partner on the other end. You're not asking for anything unreasonable. You're asking for closeness, communication, reassurance, the things that build emotional safety. But instead of feeling met, you're met with distance. And the most painful part is that the more you reach, the more they retreat. It can feel like you're trying to love someone who is always a few steps away, no matter how far you stretch. And yes, understanding why they are the way they are can build compassion, but it doesn't remove the sting of being consistently shut out, especially when you're offering something genuine. The emotional consequences of loving someone who's dismissive avoidant can sneak up on you slowly. At first, you might just think you're being patient. You tell yourself that everyone has their own pace, and maybe they just need time. But over time, that patience turns into self-silencing. You begin to hold back what you really feel because you're afraid it'll scare them away. You stop asking for reassurance because it never seems to go well. You start questioning whether your needs are too much or your feelings are too intense. And without realizing it, you begin to shrink inside the relationship. It's incredibly subtle at first. Maybe you tell yourself, I don't want to nag, or they're just going through something. But eventually, you realize that you've become so focused on making the relationship work that you've stopped checking in with yourself. Are you okay? Do you feel supported, seen, loved, or are you constantly on edge, trying to read the room, trying not to say the wrong thing that might cause them to pull away again? You may think you're being loyal, loving, or flexible, but really, you're making yourself smaller to stay connected to someone who isn't meeting you emotionally. That's not devotion, that's self-abandonment. And over time, that dynamic chips away at your self-worth. You begin to feel like love always has to be earned, like emotional closeness is a privilege rather than a birthright. One of the hardest things to admit is that sometimes what we call understanding is actually fear. Fear of loss, fear of being alone. But the longer you keep bending to meet someone who won't bend back, the more disconnected you become from yourself. And that's not love, it's survival. In the next part, we'll talk about the first hard realization that can shift this entire pattern. One of the most painful things you can discover after loving a dismissive avoidant is this: love is not enough. You can love someone with your whole heart, be patient, loyal, supportive. But if there's no emotional safety, that love has nowhere to land. It ends up bouncing around in a space that never really receives it. Emotional safety is what gives love room to grow. It's what makes it possible to bring your full self to the relationship without fear of being punished, ignored, or dismissed for feeling too deeply. Without that safety, love becomes a guessing game, a constant recalibration of how much can I express without pushing them away. That's not peace. That's survival mode. And this leads to the second hard truth. You can't earn connection from someone who is committed to emotional distance. It doesn't matter how kind, understanding, or emotionally intelligent you are. If they are locked behind walls, they refuse to acknowledge nothing you say or do will be enough to pull them into closeness they're terrified of. You could spend months or years trying to prove you're safe, trying to show them that vulnerability won't hurt them. But if they are unwilling to meet you, you'll only keep proving to yourself that their distance is somehow your responsibility. And that's where resentment and exhaustion begin to build. Here's another realization that catches many people off guard. Chemistry is not compatibility. Just because you feel a strong emotional or physical pull to someone doesn't mean they're right for you. In fact, that intense spark can often be your nervous system reacting to something familiar, especially if you grew up around inconsistency, emotional distance, or needing to earn love. When you're used to working for affection, the emotional ups and downs of an avoidant partner might feel like passion or intensity. But what's actually happening is your body responding to the roller coaster. And while the chemistry may be real, that doesn't mean it's healthy. Long-term connection needs more than intensity. It needs consistency. Another tough pill to swallow is this: You can't fix or rescue them no matter how much you love them, understand them, or want to help them heal. Healing is a choice, and unless they are ready and willing to do the internal work to understand their attachment patterns, nothing you do will make the relationship feel balanced or mutual. Trying to carry the emotional load for both people will only drain you. Yes, avoidants have real wounds, often from childhood, but it's not your job to patch them up. You can offer a safe space, but if they're not stepping into it, your energy is better spent on yourself. And finally, perhaps the most important realization of all closure doesn't come from them. It comes from choosing yourself. Avoidant partners rarely offer clean breakups, honest conversations, or accountability. More often, the relationship ends in silence or emotional detachment, leaving you with questions, what-ifs, and loose threads. You may find yourself waiting for a message, an apology, or some moment of clarity that never arrives. But here's the truth. The real closure isn't in what they say or don't say. It's in you deciding to stop waiting for them to give you peace and start creating that peace for yourself. You get closure when you stop telling the story that if you had just done something different, they would have stayed. You get closure when you stop chasing the potential of who they could be and start seeing the reality of who they are. You get closure when you say, I may never get the answers I want, but I will not let this dynamic define what I believe about love or about myself. Let me tell you something that people in these relationships often don't hear enough. It wasn't your fault. Your emotions weren't too much. Your need for connection, reassurance, and closeness was not unreasonable. You were just with someone who wasn't emotionally available, someone who may have cared about you but didn't know how to show up for you in the ways you needed. And that's a gap that love alone can't bridge. Healing after this kind of relationship isn't about blaming them or shaming yourself. It's about recognizing where the emotional labor became one-sided, where your needs were consistently unmet, and where your self-worth began to erode. It's about learning to spot the difference between real intimacy and emotional pursuit. And most of all, it's about learning to trust yourself again, your voice, your boundaries, your right to be loved in a way that doesn't require you to disappear. So if you've loved a dismissive avoidant and felt like you lost pieces of yourself along the way, know this, those pieces are not gone. They're still yours to reclaim. And you reclaim them every time you stop reaching for someone who won't reach back and start reaching inward instead. That's where your real power lives. That's where healing begins. Healing from a relationship with a dismissive avoidant isn't just about moving on. It's about unlearning the belief that love has to come at the cost of your emotional well-being. And it starts when you stop personalizing their distance, their inability to open up, to offer warmth, to respond with consistency. That wasn't because you asked for too much. It was because they were emotionally unavailable. That's a reflection of their inner world, not a verdict on your worth. But here's where it gets harder. Healing also means grieving the version of the relationship you thought you were building. Maybe you held on to the hope that things would change, that if you were more patient, more understanding, they would finally see your love and respond to it. You weren't just in love with them, you were invested in the potential of what the relationship could become. And grieving that potential is its own kind of heartbreak. But it's also necessary because holding on to that illusion keeps you stuck in a cycle of trying to earn something that should be freely given. When you truly begin to heal, you stop seeing your emotional needs as flaws. Wanting closeness, clarity, affection, and reassurance isn't too much. It's human. You're allowed to want connection that feels secure. You're allowed to want a partner who shows up not just physically, but emotionally. And once you see that clearly, you stop trying to force a connection with someone who doesn't meet you halfway. Because here's the truth. Real intimacy requires two people who are emotionally available and willing to do the work. If you're always the one reaching, checking in, and carrying the emotional weight, then what you're in isn't a relationship, it's a one-person performance. Healing invites you to stop performing and start receiving, to choose partners who meet you with presence, not avoidance. And more than anything, to choose yourself over and over again, until your love no longer feels like a plea for connection, but a gift shared with someone who's ready to receive it. That's the love you deserve, and it begins by reclaiming all the parts of you that learned to quiet down just to be heard. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you for staying with me through a conversation that isn't always easy, but it is necessary. Loving someone with a dismissive, avoidant attachment style can leave you questioning your worth, your needs, and even your understanding of love itself. But the truth is, the pain wasn't caused by your emotional depth. It was caused by a lack of emotional reciprocity. And that's not your fault. We've walked through 5 hard realizations today. You learned that love on its own is not enough without emotional safety. That you can't earn closeness from someone committed to staying emotionally distant. That chemistry is not the same as compatibility, especially when it's fueled by anxiety rather than trust. That no amount of love can fix someone who isn't ready to face their own emotional blocks. And perhaps most importantly, that closure doesn't come from them. It comes when you decide to stop reaching for someone who won't reach back and instead choose to return home to yourself. Healing after a relationship like this isn't about turning off your feelings. It's about reclaiming your voice, your needs, and your right to be loved fully, not conditionally. It's about realizing that the safest love is the one where you don't have to fight to be seen, and you deserve that kind of love. Thank you so much for watching this video and for allowing me to walk alongside you in this journey. If this spoke to you, if you saw yourself in these words, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. I share weekly content to help you navigate complex relationships with clarity, compassion, and self-respect. And I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Let me know which realization hit home for you, or share your own story. Your voice matters, and it might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Until next time, be kind to your heart. You are not too much. You are not broken. And you deserve love that feels like peace, not a performance.